this trust board meeting in public, and may I start with apologies for absence, please, Juliana?
Yes, apologies have been received from Anne Cooper.
Thank you. And are there any declarations of interest this morning that anyone wishes to make that are not already registered? No. Good, thank you. In that case, could I move to item 1.2, which is the minutes of the meeting of the 28th of January? If could I take them on accuracy first of all, please? Is someone prepared to move them as a correct record?
Yes.
Yes, Kath.
Thank you. And is that that's agreed? Thank you. In that case, I can move to any matters arising that are not on the agenda or not on the, or the action log is empty. But are there any matters arising from those minutes anyone wishes to raise this morning? You okay? Thank you. We will move to the action log, but as you will see, there the action log is blank this morning, so we have no actions outstanding. Could we just agree to receive it though for the minutes?
Yeah.
Thank you. Item 1.3 are the records of urgent decisions that were made outside of the meeting. So we'll take them one at a time. The record of urgent decision relating to the investment in personal issue smartphones, which you will remember. Could we agree to approve that formally in the board, and then we can add signatures as relevant?
Yep.
Agreed. Thank you. And I hope I pronounced this right. The record of urgent decision around Riker stretchers. Could we agree to approve that and get the relevant signatures attached to the decision?
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. In which case, that's the formal matters out of the way. We move to. We have no items on the agenda this morning relating to strategy development and business planning at part 2, so straight through to part 3, which is 3.1 patient stories. Steve, it's your presentation, I believe.
Thank you, Chairman. Juliana, are you going to drive the slides for me?
Yes, certainly, I'll show those now.
Thank you.
Hopefully you can see those now.
That's great. All right, I can't see the slides now. That's quite interesting.
Neither can I, Steve. You're all right.
Want to try that again, Juliana?
I will, yeah.
Yeah. That's better. Thank you.
There we go.
That's great. So what I wanted to do today was, because normally we have a patient story from an individual patient in each board meeting, and I thought it would be useful today to just do a little bit of a stock take and a reflection on our experience of hearing patient stories so far and how we might develop that in the future. So first of all, just a quick reflection on what patient stories are about. Obviously, these are, patient stories are individual personal accounts of a patient's experience. And I think the really important thing is that they're described in their own words and preferably by the patient themselves rather than mediated through ourselves as healthcare professionals. I think the important thing about patient stories is that they help to highlight areas of good practice and also where there's an opportunity for us to improve the quality of our services through us as a board and as an organisation actively listening to the patient's voice and learning from it. So just move the slide on, Julia. Thank you. So what's our experience been to date? Well, we've heard 16 patient stories since 2017 in the public board, and I must admit, until I delved back into to prepare this presentation, I hadn't realised just how many different patient stories we'd heard. And as I said before, they give us important learning either from negative experiences of care or from examples of excellent care. We've generally identified the patients who've given us their stories through complaints or compliments or through an adverse event. So they've been fairly narrowly defined, and we'll come back to that later. The stories have been presented either in a slide format or in a video format or a combination of those. And of course, the most recent one involved Emily directly in the board discussion, which I think was particularly successful as an event. Our initial approach in the board was mainly to present the story and just to pause for reflection, if you like. So the resonance of the patient's experience informed our discussions generally, but later stories we focused increasingly on the kind of tangible learning from the stories and the opportunities for improvement. So our approach has evolved over time. Just wanted to quickly recap on just some of the stories that we've heard since 2017. So the first one is Ian's story. So Ian collapsed and an ambulance was called when he was gasping for breath. And there was a delay in our dispatch of an ambulance to Ian because we didn't recognise his ineffective breathing at an early enough stage. So there was some. This story kind of resonated with other experiences that we'd had through our incident reporting as well, and so there's been quite a big focus since this point on education for our EMDs in the operations centre and on guidance for staff to recognise ineffective breathing. The second story relates to a very sad story of Jamie, who was found with a ligature around his neck, and his father found him and started CPR, and then 999 was called, and a number of our crews arrived and took over Jamie's resuscitation. The outcome was sadly unsuccessful. But Donna, Jamie's mother, reported that, and her story described the compassion shown by the crews and what a big difference that made to the experience of the family and their opportunity to say goodbye to their son, and also something very important to them to be able to donate his organs for other patients in the future. James's story. James was hit by a car while he was travelling on his motorbike, and our staff arrived quickly on scene and assessed James using the major trauma tool, administered chest compressions en route to hospital, and supported his recovery. And this was the attending clinician's first chest compressions since they qualified. And they were very well supported by the clinical supervisor. And the observations from this story were given that we just introduced fairly recently the new ambulance response program processes, and this demonstrated how effective they were at enabling us to target resources at patients with specific needs. And this story also highlighted the importance of good clinical supervision and the value of remote clinical advice for our clinicians on scene. The Kari's story we've had fairly recently in the board, and Kari was struggling to breathe and phoned 999, and her experience was that the crew that attended her were very pleasant to start with, but once she mentioned that she had a DNA CPR in place, then she felt that the crew's attitude changed quite negatively, and she was left with a feeling of being worthless and was quite distressed by that. And we took quite a lot of learning from that story around the support we need to give to staff about positive communication with patients, and the use of the patient stories as part of training for staff to highlight some of the unintended consequences of communication and behaviour. And obviously the Say Yes to Respect campaign was also launched shortly after that. And then Emily's story, as I said earlier, we had Emily's story in our last board meeting, and Emily's experience was of taking an overdose in December of 2019, and I think it's fair to say that the response of our attending staff at the time wasn't as supportive as it could have been, and Emily felt judged in relation to her mental health. So we heard Emily's story in the public board meeting. It was presented as a pre-recorded video, and Emily was also in attendance at the board. And I think the discussion that surrounded Emily's story was really helpful to us in informing our wider discussion around our mental health plan, and it's helped to inform our development plans. And I think Emily took that positive experience from attending the board as well, and happily she's agreed to continue to work with us and support us as one of our critical friends. So there have been a number of actions arisen related to patient stories over the years. Not all of these have been directly as a result of the story. Some of them have, and some of them have the content of the patient story has helped to influence work that has already been happening for some time. And I've just identified some of those on this slide here. So promotion of early warning scores and sepsis screening tools to support our clinical decisions, improved event coordination at sporting events, changes to our policy to enable patients to carry their own oxygen on PTS vehicles, where we had a story where a patient was particularly frustrated because they were asked to leave their own oxygen behind and use trust oxygen cylinders, which wasn't very convenient. A lot of work around conversations with patients about end-of-life preferences and supporting the active use of respect forms, and a big focus on communication and compassion through the trust behavioural framework, and obviously the mental health improvement plan that we talked about earlier on. And all of the stories haven't been negative ones, which is good. So we've had opportunities to celebrate lots of positive experiences as well through the patient stories, and these have been relevant across our services. So we heard about a patient accessing the 111 service for allergy advice and receiving very timely advice and rapid GP appointment through the service. Heard about the caring response from our CFR team to one patient. Heard about our compassionate care during an urgent asthma episode, about effective spinal assessment and care, about a positive outcome after effective cardiac arrest care, and also about the involvement of our staff in public communication about the dangers of choking after they successfully responded to a 2-year-old child who choked on a piece of fruit. And finally, a real positive story about the liaison between our PTS service and renal patients to support the planning and scheduling of journeys. And that was particularly good to hear at the time, because we'd had some challenges around meeting the specific needs of renal patients in the past. So moving forward, what we want to do is to build on the experience that we've had to date, and but also thinking about the really positive experience of Emily's attendance at the board last time, and where we were able to align the story from an individual patient to our thinking about wider developments and service improvements. So we want to do more of that in the future. We'd like to expand the sources of patient stories to support a more diverse perspective. So look for different opportunities to engage patients and ask if they'd be willing to support us with stories. Continue with the video format, which has been successful, but also where patients are able to and it's relevant to support patients or carers to attend in the board in person where we can. Continue to follow up the actions arising from patient stories and also to feed back to the storytellers themselves and continue to build the visibility of our repository of patient stories. And we have the stories visible on the intranet at the moment, and we do use them in a range of training exercise, but I think there's an opportunity to make the resource more interactive for staff and the public and make the learning from the stories more generally visible. And finally, we do want to develop a complementary approach to the use of staff stories, and there is a recommendation in National Freedom Speak Up publication that should be part of a board's approach, and I think we can profitably look to use a similar approach to the patient stories with our staff as well, and we'll look to introduce that sometime in the coming year. And finally, I just wanted to end with photos of just some of the patients who've taken their time to share their stories with us, and just to reiterate our thanks as a board to all the patients and families who've helped us over the last few years. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. I'm now getting absolutely 100% feedback from my own voice. So I'm really having a great technological morning this morning, but we'll carry on. Thank you, Steve. That was a very good presentation. I enjoyed it. I do think the patient stories have added a great deal to our agendas, and particularly, as you say, Emily's patient story where she was with us for the board meeting. It was it really did give us a great insight into what happened to her and what we could do better. It was very, very useful, and I'm glad she's staying with us. That's good news. So, any questions to Steve on the presentation you've just seen? Particularly, I suppose, around the way forward. Everybody content? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it really, Steve, you've hit the nail on the head, and everybody's very content with what you're suggesting, which is good news. We won't. If everybody's happy, then we can simply note your report. But yeah, we'll look forward to seeing those patient stories come forward into future agendas, and particularly where it is proper to do so, to include the patient themselves in the public board meeting. That I think that's a real addition to our assurance. So thanks very much for the presentation and for the work. So we'll note that and move on. Thank you. Yeah. 3.2 is the report on. Sorry
to interrupt. Jeremy's got his hand raised, Kath.
Oh, sorry, Jeremy. Thank you, Prod.
Just say, Kath, I mean, I know this comes later in the agenda, but it's probably timely to say, I think the idea of having staff stories as well would be an excellent idea. Yeah. Just going to complement, we see it from the patient side. I think we ought to see it from the staff side as well. And I know it comes up under, I think it's under the Freedom to Speak Up paper, but yeah. I think it's time, probably to raise it now, because I think it's an important thing that we do that.
Thank you, Jeremy, and I agree with you entirely. And can we just agree that we run those two things together? I think it is important. It's increased assurance for the board. And similarly, Steve, if staff, if patients can attend and tell their story personally, so can staff, and I think that would be equally a good idea if we can run the two together in that way.
That's right. So I think it's. I mean, not everybody wants to, feels comfortable attending the board in person, do they? Patients or staff, but I think where we can, and where we can, offer active support for people to do that then it's really beneficial, isn't it? As we saw with Emily's contribution, and it kind of lifts the story into something, much more meaningful level, and helps us with our with our future planning as well. So I think we'll certainly look to support that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Smashing, thank you. We will move to the violence reduction standard. I think probably one of the most important items on the agenda today. So Steve, are you taking this one too?
Yes, I think you've got me for a while with a little bit of Luzani joining in at some point.
A pleasure, Steve.
Apologies in advance. Thank you, Chairman. So this paper is really just to update the board on a number of developments relating to violence reduction, and as we know, this is one of the significant areas of risk faced by our staff in their day-to-day work, and there's a lot of work already happened and happening around this area. Focus on safer responding procedures, our data flagging support for criminal prosecutions, and our post-incident care process that came in just very recently. So and many other kind of areas of work, but I think we all recognise that there's more that we need to do to support staff in this area. So the first thing I just wanted to cover under this paper was the new violence reduction standard that has been introduced across the NHS in December of last year, and the standard will be now incorporated into the standard NHS contract as well. It sets out a number of expectations under the headings of plan, do, check and act. A large amount of the recommendations in the standard are already underway or in place in the organisation, but I think the key area of development for us is the need to do a comprehensive self-assessment in relation to the standard, and then develop a dedicated strategy or plan arising from that self-assessment, which the trust board is asked to sign off. So the intention is that we'll set to work on that self-assessment and developing the strategy during the first quarter of this year, and then later this year we'll bring the self-assessment and the strategy back to the board for approval, if that's okay. The second item in the paper is the 7-point action plan for victims of crime, and this is something that originated with the police service, but our security manager has been working with police and fire with the intention of developing this 7-point plan so that it's in place across all of the blue light services in Yorkshire. And in one sense, it doesn't introduce anything new. It's all procedures and expectations that should reasonably be in place in the organisation. But I think that the purpose of the 7-point action plan is to set out in very explicit terms to staff the support that the organisation seeks to provide to them, and what their expectations can be of the organisation. So again, it's in a draft form attached to the board paper today. We want to do a little bit more work engaging internally with through our management team, but also with our staff side colleagues and staff. So again, we hope to complete this over the next few months and sign this off for full implementation, and just looking for board support to take that forward today. And then the final item to just cover today is the body-worn video development. We have talked about this in previous board meetings, and we did approve progression to be part of the national pilot in our March meeting. So since then, we can confirm that the trust has received £5,000 from NHSE to support the pilot. All of that money arrived in last financial year, and we weren't in a position where we could carry that money forward into future years. So all of that money is being used to buy camera equipment. So we have approximately 1,000 units of cameras plus fitments to deploy. We've got a project group now up and running, which has very significant staff side representation around the table as well. That's being led by David O'Brien, the Associate Director of Performance Assurance and Risk. The intention is that we go live with our first station rollout in May, and there's a provisional list of stations that we want to start with in wave one, and we'll probably end up with around 10 stations, I think, in total by the time we've rolled out 1,000 cameras. There are a number of areas that we need to work on before we can effectively roll out, and that includes a number of areas of policy and procedure and training for staff. So all of that is in progress, and we're looking to sign off the policies and procedures in the trust management group in the 5th of May. The procedures address issues of clinical governance, of patient confidentiality, as well as balancing patient confidentiality with staff protection, and also information governance as well. So there's some quite tricky issues to consider when deploying the body-worn video, but I think we're comfortably working through those at the moment. So in terms of the body-worn video initiative, it's now going to be a 3-year pilot. So it was originally intended as a 1-year pilot, but NHSE have extended that to 3 years. All trusts in England are involved in the pilot, and there's a national evaluation that NHSE have commissioned separately to run alongside that. There will be some cost pressure for the organisation associated with the extended pilot, because there will be some licence costs, and there are some implementation costs that we're going to need to bear as an organisation as we roll out, and the licence costs for the next couple of years. In terms of further rollout beyond the 3-year pilot period, that will depend on the outcome of the evaluation commissioned by NHSE, but clearly that is something we will need to take into consideration in future board discussions. So those are the areas I wanted to cover today. I think there's some next steps set out in section 4 in relation to each of those areas, but in essence, I'm asking for the board to note the work on the violence reduction standard and support the proposals for taking that forward, to support the development of the Blue Light 7-point action plan and implementation in the trust, and just to note where we are with regards to the body-worn video pilot, and support the next steps in implementation as they're outlined. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Rob.
Yeah, Kath, it's just since we're discussing this in public board, I know it's an area that we've mentioned a couple of times, but in relation to the body-worn video pilot, whilst it's a real priority to reduce the number of instances of violence and aggression against staff, I think we just need to record the whole spectrum of views from frontline staff in terms of whether they see this as a good solution, or feel it's not an appropriate action. So I just wanted to lodge that in as part of the development step.
Thank you, Rob. There are some real different views among staff as to the way forward, but we do need to make sure that the pilot runs properly, so we get a real assessment of whether this is helpful or not. I'll bring you in, Steve, but could I just bring Jeremy in first? Jeremy, please.
Thanks, Kath. Following on from Rob's point, really, Kath, just to say, I think it would be really helpful, I think, as part of the pilot scheme, that we have some kind of process for formal feedback from staff about issues that are raised by wearing this, by using the body worn camera stuff. And I don't know, it's probably part of it, Steve, but if you can just confirm that there is that process in place.
Absolutely. We started, we've already completed a staff survey, which had several hundred respondents, just to get a baseline feel for how staff felt about body worn video to start with, and that's been really useful and is helping to inform our implementation plans and our communication with staff. And I think our survey, I think, has been picked up by the national team, and so that there's a consistent approach to that across the ambulance services. So our intention is to continue to gauge staff views and feedback. So there will be a number of kind of KPIs and data elements of the evaluation, but I think the staff experience directly is the qualitative information is at least as important as the numbers. So yes, absolutely, Jeremy.
Could I ask, and I've no idea whether this is going on or not, but are any of our ICSs actually looking at violence reduction across the NHS? I mean, I know we need, this is our project, and it's really important that we carry it out. I'm looking forward to the self-assessment coming through and an action plan coming through. I think we all are extremely concerned at the risk that our frontline teams live with every day around their own personal safety. But they're not the only NHS staff who are subject to violent occurrences. And you look at A&E staff, perhaps I have no idea, but you look at community teams and mental health teams working in the community that I know about personally. And I just wondered if there were any studies going on where we can be part of something that's broader, to see if there's any learning from other parts of the NHS. But I mean, I'm not aware of anything happening in Humber, Gosden Vale, I'll be quite honest. I just wondered if I'd missed something somewhere else.
No, I'm not aware of anything.
No,
Kath,
I'm not in West Yorkshire and Harrogate.
No, not at a significant level. No, I mean,
Right.
I've had discussions of the topic, but I think the work that I'm aware of would be happening at individual organisation level, I think, rather than at ICS level.
Yeah.
But I mean, we can look to share our learning through the pilot, can't we? Through the ICS channels. So I don't think any harm in us doing that, because there will be some wider learning, won't there, potentially?
I think so. It's only just crossed my mind, but I do think so. And I noticed Andrew nodding around mental health teams. I mean, it's something that I deal with on another board, and I'm sure Andrew does. So yeah, I just think if we're working as a system, there might be learning across the systems from what we find out through this work. It's worth just keeping it in mind.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Yes, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. I do think, although I understand perhaps some of the difficulties that this might throw up, but I think liaison and connection with the various police forces might be helpful in terms of sharing. I mean, obviously they've had body-worn cameras for many years now, and I just think that how we approach this, how we deal with difficult issues, how we reassure staff, etc. The various police forces in Yorkshire should be able to help us, I would have thought.
Yes, Dave.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, there are obvious, quite important differences between the way the police would deploy the technology and the way our staff would. But yes, I think it's important to say, I suppose, that there's fairly limited learning to date from ambulance services around the use of the technology. But so most of the learning that we do have is coming in from police services. So there, through the national project, there's quite, you know, there's plenty of read across from the police experience as well. So
Steve, is there anywhere else in the world where ambulance services use body-worn cameras?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not aware of any off the top of my head, but that doesn't mean to say that there aren't any. It's not something I can call up readily. But I mean, in this country, we've just got some limited experience from North East Ambulance and London Ambulance, but it is quite limited at this point. So I think most of our learning is going to come from the pilot that we're just embarking on. So which is why
it might be worth trying to find out, because
Yeah.
I would have thought that would be very helpful.
The evidence that I've seen to date is it's not definitive really in terms of whether the use of body-worn video in any setting reduces violence and aggression. It's a difficult one to ascertain from the evidence. What it does seem to where the evidence is stronger is around supporting prosecutions and follow-up of violent episodes. Now, what you don't know is whether the publicity around those prosecutions in itself helps to deter people from committing sort of violent and aggressive acts. But so I think there's a lot still to learn through this pilot. So the evaluation will be extremely important, I think.
Thank you, Steve. Yes, Phil.
Kath, just 2 quick points. I think the fire service, or some fire services, have also used helmet-borne cameras, and that's partly been around incident management, but also some of the wider threats to crews that have been, had fireworks sent at them as they've been trying to tackle fires, etc. So there might be some sort of halfway house there between the total criminal prosecution bit from the police side and also the more responding to the problem support bit that the ambulance service use. So I think there's less research, but there is some services that have used that. And then just the other thing, I know it's slightly wider than the body-worn camera bit, but I think there's also an element of giving a message that's supportive of control room and 111 staff, that whilst this is focusing on body-worn cameras and violence reduction outside of the organisation, sort of within the on the streets of Yorkshire, the verbal abuse is becoming slightly more common, and therefore it is, for the people sat at a desk taking calls, it's also sometimes as traumatic. And I think it's just ensuring that as an organisation, I know we're not, but ensuring that staff don't accidentally think that we're only focusing on people working on the road rather than also taking a view of verbal abuse.
Yeah, I think
that's a really important point. Yes, Steve. Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
No, I was going to agree. I think that is a very good point. And when we get onto the incidents and lessons learned paper, we saw not in this quarter, but in the previous quarter, we saw the rise in violence and aggression towards staff wasn't actually on the front line. It was, as Phil's described, it was in relation to staff on the end of the telephone. So yes, we're very much aware of the need to support our remote telephone assessment staff as well.
Do we have any? There's anecdotal evidence, Steve, that the end of lockdown, or lockdown itself, because of the rising stress, I suppose, in society, has caused an increase in physical and verbal abuse, not only for NHS staff and our own staff, but people like retail staff. There was a piece on the news the other night. Is that real, or is it just anecdotal? Do we know? Have we had any figures around? Is it rising at the moment?
I think certainly the figures we get in the trust, it's you have to take the anecdote with some level of caution, and you know, things get blown up in the media very significantly on the back of specific events. But having said that, I think we also know that there's a general underreporting of violence and aggression from staff. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. But our own data suggests that there's been a bit of a rise in the last couple of quarters, and first of all around the remote staff, and then in the last quarter for face-to-face staff. Now that's not at a too alarming a level at this point, but there is a visible rise. Some of that could be related to improved reporting as we're you know trying to encourage staff to report, and we're trying to demonstrate the support that we provide to staff when they do experience violence and aggression. But some of it could also be a real rise in violence and aggression as well. It's very, very difficult to kind of be definitive about it, though.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Please, I know we're all very aware of the problems that our staff face, and right across the service, and I know we'll want to see that self-assessment and plan come forward, Steve, so we'll look forward to that. Have we got a timescale for that? Forgive me, have I missed it in the report? Do we know when it's likely to come back to the board?
I would thought we'll be progressing quite well with it in the next quarter. So maybe, if not the next board meeting, certainly the one after that, I would expect us to see it.
No, that's smashing. No, that's good news. Thank you. Are there any more questions to Steve on this report? No. Thank you. In that case, the recommendations are either on the front of the report or at paragraph 5.1, and you can read them to note the violence reduction standard, support the proposals regarding the required self-assessment, support the development of the 7-point action plan, and note the current position regarding the Body Worn video pilot and its implementation plan. Can we agree those? I can see you now. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks, Steve. Hugely important piece of work. So if we can move to 3.3 and the Freedom to Speak Up report. I think I've seen Luzani is here with us. At least I'm assuming that the LM in a little circle at the bottom of my screen is Luzani. Are you kicking it off, Steve, and then handing over to Luzani?
Yes, I'll just very quickly hand over to Luzani, and then just pick up at the end. I mean, it's just to say this is our regular paper into the board. It's normally we cover 2 quarters, but just to kind of reconcile our timelines and get us in line for the forthcoming board schedule, we've covered 3 quarters in this paper rather than just the 2. And it's also worth noting that both the audit committee and the quality committee receive regular reports on Freedom to Speak Up in between the 6 monthly board reports. I'll hand straight over to Luzani, though, to talk us through the issues arising from the last period, and also any developmental issues he wants to cover, and I'll just pick back up at the end if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Hi, Luzani, welcome to the board.
Hi, okay, thank you so much. Thanks, Steve. Good morning, everybody. As you may all be aware, it's been a difficult period for all of us. Freedom to Speak Up as well, in terms of how we've sort of tried to reach out to staff. So it's been one of those sort of areas where we need to be going out to staff. We've not been able to, but we've continued to work with corporate comms to try and raise Freedom to Speak Up awareness. And if we go into the paper, we have been rising in terms of the concerns, not as much as the other ambulance trust. When you look at Northwest Ambulance Service, London Ambulance Service, they've had a significant amount of concerns raised. But we also have ambulance services that have not submitted any data, so it's so difficult to compare across board. This could be probably due to COVID, but there's also Northwest Ambulance Service, which has not provided any data for a while, and EMAS, they have not been providing any data. So it's so difficult to compare. In terms of our concerns, there is a trend in terms of bullying and harassment, not as bad as the other sort of ambulance services, such as Southeast Central Ambulance Service and London Ambulance Service. Our numbers are low, even though it is still concerning that we still have elements of bullying or perceived bullying and harassment. And then in terms of patient safety and quality, the quality element, across the 3 quarters, we've only had 4 concerns relating to patient quality and safety. I think, like we've said in the last board, there's not much reporting in terms of patient safety, whether this could be something that we could look into going forward in terms of how we communicate with ambulance crews or other people who deal with patients. Then again, it could be that they are using other methods of reporting. So, you know, it's so difficult to sort of measure whether it is because people are not raising concerns or it is because, you know, our systems are that, you know, robust that people are using other areas of raising concerns. When you talk about bullying and harassment, there's been quite a number of concerns raised about online bullying and harassment. And I think there could be some work as well that could be done by the trust in terms of how we address online bullying and harassment towards colleagues. So we've had discussions with corporate communications, but there's nothing concrete yet in terms of the way forward. Like what Steve was saying, we've had a look at the concerns across going a bit further back, just to reconcile our figures, and we seem to be on average in terms of how we've sort of coped during COVID, and we've had quite significant discussions with Karen and with other executives. Jeremy has been brilliant in terms of supporting me as my non-executive lead. And as we are looking into what we're going to be doing going forward after COVID and supporting staff, we are thinking of starting to go out a bit more in terms of going to stations and other places of work as soon as we start opening up. And in that respect, we've managed to sort of get some more advocates to join us. They had their training last week, so I conducted the training with 9 advocates who were trained, and hopefully going forward we can have a bit more representation in other areas as well. We did touch on patient transport. We don't seem to have much representation, and this is quite a big area of where the trust does, move a lot of patients, and we could do with some representation there. So we have been discussing how we can try and encourage more colleagues from patient transport to sign up to become advocates as well. And I know Steve is going to touch on the triangulation aspect of it. We've provided the numbers and the concerns that were raised through Freedom to Speak Up to Steve, and I think you will touch on that. On the note of the National Guardian's Office, we have continued to have meetings on the regional level and the national level, which I've attended most of them, and we've also been I was one of the guardians out of the 600. There were 4 guardians chosen to promote freedom to speak up via video, and I was one of the guardians who was likely enough chosen to represent the guardians. In terms of the way forward, I think more communication, working with corporate communications, like I said, working with workforce and development in other areas whereby we can sort of try and work together instead of doing things in terms of independently because we tend to have gaps. So there's a lot of work that's ongoing. I'm constantly talking to other areas like HR, which has been very helpful. HR business partners have been quite helpful in addressing concerns that have been raised. I'll hand over back to Steve unless anybody has got questions on the paper.
Thank you, Lizani, but congratulations on being chosen to be part of the video. That's smashing. I'll bring Nick in first if Steve doesn't mind. Nick.
Okay, thanks, Kath. Just two things. The first thing is around online. It's a real ongoing challenge for us. I think we need to really review how we deal with those. There's a number of issues coming through. I mean, I pick these up quite, not just freedom to speak up, but just generally the way that the society is now staffed now with social media. I think we need to modernise and really review how we deal with that. And the second thing is that I just look at the paper, the anonymous, the zero for YAS and Luzanne. I think that's a good reflection on you around that people feel like you're approachable to do that, and freedom to speak actually works within YAS. So I think that's really, really powerful, that people feel they can raise their issues through this process and have the trust and confidence in it to action it and also to do it in a fair way.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. I agree absolutely. The fact that we've got a zero in that anonymous box means a heck of a lot, that people feel as though they're safe to raise issues. Really good stuff. Andrew.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Lizani. Really great paper. What I wanted to ask was, do you feel that you have the support you need to undertake your role effectively?
Yes, we are having regular meetings. Steve has been very supportive. Jeremy is very supportive from the non-executive side, and the chief exec as well as my operations executive, Nick Smith, has been, these people are people that I feel free to go to at any time. There's there is an open door policy in terms of work and approach. The only constraint going forward, as far as I can see, in terms of how because of the amount of work that we have going forward, it is to a part-time role, which is limited in terms of what we can achieve in that sort of times. But there is advantages to it because I still go on the front line and I get to meet crews on the front line. But there is still this element that other services have invested a lot of time in terms of the time that the Guardian is allocated. We speak about London Ambulance Service, the numbers that they have in terms of the concerns that have been raised. It's probably testimony to the amount of the group that they have. They've got more advocates, they've got the Guardian and the deputy and the coordinator. So, these are things that are probably to look into, how much time is allocated in terms of, being able to sort of implement the changes that we want to. But in terms of the support has been tremendous, to be honest. I couldn't have done most of this without the amount of support that I've got.
That's really good to hear. And if ever you feel you need more support, do come back. The door is open. There's no need. You don't need to push on it. There's an open door for this subject here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Thanks very much. Jeremy, just because we are in a public board, Jeremy is our non-executive lead on freedom to speak up. Jeremy.
Thank you, Kath. Just to say, there is some discussion at the moment about setting up a regional forum around freedom to speak up, which I've been asked to. The kind of contacted me about it probably about 3 weeks ago. There was a very short survey which I had to complete, which was basically around how many times, whether we had a freedom to speak up guardian, how many advocates we'd got, whether we met regularly. So I've sent all that back, and I'm just waiting now to hear whether anything comes to fruition around that. So hopefully there will be a regional forum which we'll be part of in the not too distant future.
Oh, that's good news. Oh, that's good. Steve, did you want to play sweeper?
Can do. Thanks, Chairman. I see Tim's hand's just gone up, so I don't.
Oh,
You want to
sorry.
go first, Tim, and then I'll wrap up.
No, thanks, Steve. I just want to, I suppose, underscore this issue about an approach and policy framework and action against online issues that may arise. I mean, I know, you know, it's very topical at the moment, nationally. But I do think, you know, and I know everyone would agree that it doesn't really matter what form bullying, intimidation, deprecation takes, it's still to be condemned, and for us to make sure that people know that it's not acceptable. So it's just to say, I know when Lusani was talking there, he raised it, but then I think you were saying, Lusani, that we're awaiting developments or we're still working through it. It's just to say that I think everybody on the board would want to see some action on that, and something brought in that you know, was a very clear and unambiguous position.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Did you want to come back in, Lusani? I mean, Nick, to be fair, because Nick raised it too. It is becoming an issue in society, isn't it? But we do need to make sure that we have the relevant powers, I suppose, to act properly against online bullying. Nick?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's some of the grey areas around the internal, external. So messaging, I mean, the different formats that you've got around messaging and whether it's related to work or not. I'm no expert in HR, but it's about case law, isn't it? I don't know if there's that much case law probably to rely on. But it's around the technology as well, the type of technology that's there. So it's probably about awareness then Tim, around actually using, I totally agree, whatever form is unacceptable. But it's just posed an awareness and more of an education around what systems are out there and what forms it can take as well. It just seems just new, and it just seems to struggle with understanding some of us around the different forms and different technologies that are out there.
Yeah.
It's like TikTok.
I don't know what that is. No, I was going to say that. What the heck is TikTok? I don't. Well, I sort of know. I'm still struggling with Instagram. However, Steve, did you want to come back?
Yes, I'll not even pretend to be expert in the subject of social media, but I think what I can say is that Lusani and myself had some conversations with Helen, who I think is on the call, just around developing our in-house approach to use of social media in a way that will be well mediated. There's obviously guidance for staff around social media, but as Nick and others have said, you know, the use of social media and the different formats are probably developing faster than our guidance has developed. And what we have experienced, you know, some of the feedback we've had around that as related to the YAS platform, where that is run by staff, and it with an attempt at mediation, but it's not always as successful as it could be. So we're looking to see how we can influence that in a positive way. But some of the issues that have risen have come from comments placed on closed sites around individual stations and other locations that we may not even be aware of as an executive team. So it is quite a difficult area, I think, to manage overall. Just in terms of just going back to the sort of broader issues, just to wrap up, just to say that most of the concerns that are raised are either dealt with at source by Lusani or by Lusani and members of the management team in liaison with the relevant departments, and the vast majority are addressed in that way. But there are some concerns that are raised that generate some wider areas of concern, and so we do have a small number of independent reviews that we've commissioned in one or two areas, and some action plans arising from that, and those are those are overseen through the fortnightly group that we have with Rod and myself involved with Luzani. Just on the wider development, so Freedom Speak Up is obviously one part of a lot of other work that we do around safety and around organisational culture, and we've been working for some time across directorates on looking to triangulate the information we have around organisational culture coming from different sources, so from Freedom to Speak Up, from our patient complaints and concerns, from HR systems and processes, and from the staff survey. And we've just completed a first stage of that work and presented that into the executive group in the last week or so, and we had a really good discussion around the implications of that and where that would take us in terms of next steps, both at a corporate level and in terms of targeted support for specific areas. And at the same time, we've carried out a little bit of a stock take of our various initiatives relating to organisational culture and leadership, and what we're wanting to do next is just to make sure that in each of those strands of work, and there are many, that we're actually focusing on the important issues that are flagged through our feedback about organisational culture. So that work's progressing, and it will continue over the coming year with oversight from the executive group. And I think it would be useful for us to probably give some wider feedback to the board on that in due course as that matures.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. We are running a little late, not much. But could we agree the recommendations at 7.1, which is to, and we have got considerable assurance from the report. Thank you, Luzani, and I'm sure the board would wish to support the further developments outlined in the paper. I'm wondering whether we need to do something specific around online bullying and harassment, particularly given that it can follow you home. You know, it's one of the problems, isn't it, is that online bullying doesn't only take place at work, it sort of follows you home if that is the case. So I'll leave it to you to think about, but I'm wondering if the board needs to see something specific around future policy around online bullying and harassment. But in the meantime, can we agree 7.1, the recommendations? Yeah, thank you. The lessons learned from significant events. Steve, please.
Thanks, Chairman. It's the last one from me for a while. I'll try and be concise with this one. So again, this is a regular six monthly report, and we get quarterly reports to the Quality Committee in the intervening period. So the first section of the report deals with serious incidents reported. So there has been a slight increase in the last month, but you can see the SPC data in 3.1. A couple of themes really coming out of serious incidents in the last period, and the one relates to the whole kind of focus on right care, right place, and avoiding unnecessary emergency department admission, and you know, this is an area of national interest and a big area of our development, and we've done a lot of successful work in this area, largely through Julian's team and the operational team over the last couple of years. But during the pandemic, we started to get a bit of a theme emerging around patients' reluctance to travel into hospital, and some of the issues that then flagged around practice have been around the importance of a really good discussion with the patient around their condition and their treatment options, supporting informed consent for patients about whether they travel to a hospital or are treated in some other way, and then the importance of safety netting, as in referral to other professionals for follow-up if patients are discharged at home. So that's been a key bit of learning over the last period. And then the other big theme has been around our newly qualified practitioners, newly qualified paramedics, and we obviously had quite a large number of these. And I think it's fair to say that the pandemic situation probably hasn't helped with their support during the last few months, and we have identified some areas where we've taken measures to strengthen the support of new paramedics transitioning into the organisation. But we've also identified some curriculum issues, and there's some further work being set in motion with the universities to discuss how we can develop curricula more effectively to meet the needs of staff when they come out of university. And then the final element of that is the work that Julian's team's leading around improved remote clinical support for not newly qualified paramedics and others. So those are key bits of learning. So if we move on to incidents generally, there's been a slight rise in the number of incidents reported overall, but moderate and above incidents haven't risen during the same period. So that's a good indicator, I think, for the organisation. We did carry out in section 4.2. There's a summary of the work that we did in Q3 relating to delayed response incidents, and we have done this work before a couple of years ago, but we revisited it in some detail in Q3, drilling down underneath the delayed responses to understand the impact on patients. There are a number of learning points that are identified in section 4.3, but the summary, I suppose, is that whilst there's clear implications for the quality of patient experience, what we don't see is a commensurate rise in harm that is directly correlated to delayed responses. And I think the reason for that is the mitigating actions we have in place through our demand management plan to target resources at the more poorly patients when we're in a more challenged kind of position. That delayed response monitoring is now in place as a continuous process. If you go to page 11, the staff affected incidents, we talked about violence and aggression earlier on in the meeting, and exactly as we discussed earlier, the previous quarter there was a rise mainly relating to verbal incidents for our remote staff, and in this last period we've seen a bit of a rise in relation to our face-to-face staff. On page 12, there's a summary of the infection control incidents over the last couple of years, and you can quite clearly see the peaks of incidents relating to the waves of the pandemic. And I think a large number of those incidents related to the uncertainty of staff at those points, and staff raising things through the incident reporting system where the guidance was changing, if you remember, on almost a weekly basis. So that again, there wasn't a commensurate amount of harm in relation to the incidents reported. Moving and handling is obviously a significant theme, and we'll touch on that again shortly. Just in terms of complaints and compliments and concerns, there has been a rise in the last month, and so it remains to be seen whether that continues as we come out of the lockdown. But you can see in the table on page 14 that numbers have risen. So we'll keep an eye on that as it progresses. In terms of legal services, you can see on page 15 the breakdown of new claims, and you can see that over the period of years, in particular the employer liability claims, which relate to things like moving and handling injuries and slips, trips and falls, have risen over the years, although that sort of started to plateau now. We've just we've just made an appointment of our new subject matter expert for moving and handling. So it was a physio with lots of experience in the field. So that individual will be coming in to lead the next stages of our work in mitigating that risk. Page 17 onwards talks about the coroner's process. Obviously, the process around inquests has been changed quite significantly during the pandemic, and we've had to work flexibly with coroners during that period, and that's been quite successful. There is some learning identified in section 616, and then in 619 there's a summary of the preventing future deaths report that we had in relation to the case of Thomas that has been previously reported in the board. In terms of safeguarding, I think there's some learning identified in the paper. I think the only thing to kind of raise here is that the workload of the safeguarding team generally does seem to be rising through the pandemic. So again, we think that is, at least some of that is related to the impact of COVID and the lockdown, and we'll have to see how that progresses going forward. And then the last thing to cover today is just around the health and safety executive, and just to advise the board that there were two issues that came to the attention of the health and safety executive in the last period, one relating to a concern around clinical waste management, and the second relating to cleaning of vehicles. In both cases, we followed those up with the HSE. We provided a full response, and the HSE have been satisfied with the responses that we gave, so there's no further follow-up required in either case. And that's all I wanted to cover in today's report. Happy to take questions, Chairman.
I think I'll ask Julian if you wouldn't mind to elaborate on clinical support for newly qualified paramedics in the moment. I think for me the report just, you could see the pandemic. I suppose that's the easiest way to put it. You can see the impact of the pandemic on the service, and the way that it has put stress on the way that we work. I think that's the thing that screams at me throughout the whole report, really. But thank you for that. Julian, would you mind just adding to Steve's comments about clinical support for NQPs? Because I've noticed in the series that have been through, there obviously the pandemic has not been easy for people that have just finished their degree.
No, certainly. I mean, it was one of the things that we recognised early on, that these individuals don't have the experience or the training to make safe non-conveyance decisions. So we introduced a senior clinical support cell, which we've talked about in the board previously, and we've had very, very good feedback from that. And it supports the ethos that we've been running for several years, as Steve said, now the no decision in isolation piece. I think it's one of the unique factors about the ambulance service compared to the rest of the healthcare sector. Probably accepting GPs alone, but even then they don't tend to leave their surgeries now, so there's usually somebody next door to discuss with, whereas a paramedic is in a unique position of being truly alone. So we've addressed that through, as I say, the senior clinical support cell, but now with team-based working being introduced, the team concept of having quite local peer and senior clinical support, just to literally just bounce ideas off. It's a hugely powerful tool in making balanced decisions, and we've seen that work to good effect. The other thing is, as Steve was saying, we've had, whilst the number of instances is small, the proportion that involve non-registered staff or NQPs in inappropriate non-conveyance decisions is higher than from paramedics. So we're writing that into protocol to ensure that that any patient attended by a non-registered member of staff or an NQP will have a discussion with a registered member of staff prior to any non-conveyance decisions being made. And I think finally the really big challenge for us is informed consent, and what that means, especially in the face of Montgomery. For years we've had patient refusal and patient refusal forms that have been quite scant in terms of detail on it. Whereas in the face of Montgomery, there is an obligation on the clinician to inform the patient of their relative risks of the decisions that they might want to take, and that has placed a real challenge in for frontline paramedics in terms of their ability and their knowledge base to be able to truly provide the patient with sufficient information of the relative risks to be able to make a decision not to go to hospital or not to receive the treatment that the paramedic is suggesting. And again, that's where the senior clinical support cell provides a lot of assistance in that, in terms of being able to just provide that live support to the clinician to allow the patient to make an informed choice.
Yeah. Thank you, Julian. It's a hugely important piece of work. It really is. Good. Jeremy.
Thanks, Kath. From the staff perspective, I'm just interested in from a health and well-being perspective. Is it possible, Steve, for us to start to monitor kind of the post-incident review, the post-incident care interviews that we carry out? It's something that comes up through health and well-being now and again, and I think it might well be worth us putting it onto this spreadsheet so that we can monitor the timeliness of those, because I think it's really important that we do that and that we monitor its effectiveness.
Yes, I think we should be able to do that. I'll defer to Suzanne at this point, I think, because I would imagine that there will be a process through the health and wellbeing team, won't there, Suzanne, to capture that information.
There is, Steve. Yes, I know that Helen absolutely has it on the plan to be able to make sure that this is progressed through.
We'll bring it through in one of the reports, Jeremy. If it may or may not be this one, or it might be the report arising from the health and wellbeing team. But
yeah, okay. As long as we can pick it up, that's great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Suzanne.
Thanks, Jeremy. Are there any further questions on the report? You all content? In that case, the recommendations are at 16.1. Can we agree those? And thanks to Steve for a very good suite of reports, actually, around the safety and the safety of the organisation and its workforce and its patients. Steve, we've heard a lot this morning, so thanks for that, because they all sort of fit together, don't they, into a picture of how the trust is coping with all of that. So thank you. Yeah. And we'll move to, we'll take a break after this next item, by the way, so up to you. The fit and proper person policy, there are some minor amendments to these. So Suzanne, are you taking this one?
I am, yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is a policy that we obviously we require under CQC and a number of other statutory regulations. Just some minor amendments. We've amended the name of the committee that used to be called the Remuneration and Terms of Service Committee and is now just shortened to a better name of Remuneration Committee, which is a bit easier to say. And also just some other minor amendments to the policy, but nothing substantial, but also to give assurance that all of relevant people have had their fit and proper person assessments and all the documentation is complete.
Thank you, Suzanne.
For approval.
I know that the fit and proper person processes drive us crazy occasionally. They are, however, incredibly important. I know that when you're going through it, you think, oh, for goodness sake, how many more bits of paper do they want? But it is incredibly important. So thank you for that. Are there any questions? We'll shorten it even further, by the way, to REMCO. I know we've now got it down to Remuneration Committee. It will be REMCO because they all are. Are there any questions around the amendments that we've made to this policy? No, in that case, we can take the recommendations at 4, which are to note the contents of the report and approve the minor amendments. We agreed? Thank you, and thanks very much. We will take just a 10-minute break, please. So can I have you back round about 11 o'clock? Thanks, everyone. think I've got everybody back. Thank you, that's great. So we'll commence the next bit with item 5.1, which is the Chief Executive's report. Over to you, Rod.
Thanks, Kath. Kath, I won't go through line by line, and as usual, we'll pass to directors to cover off anything by exception that they want to raise within the individual elements of the report. But needless to say, a huge amount's happened since our last public board meeting. We've had the issuing of the white paper, Integrating Care, that's putting ICSs on a statutory footing, and there's a huge amount going on around us within the 3 ICS that we support to develop that infrastructure and those new ways of working. We've also had the consultation document that we're talking about later on the agenda for the provider selection regime, so we'll talk about that more later, and the planning guidance for 2021-22, which, reflecting the uncertainty in and around the pandemic, focuses on the first 6 months of the year. Priorities within that are about the ongoing response to the pandemic and how we learn and adopt the innovations that have come from the ways of working that we've had to adopt whilst we respond to the pandemic. Big focus on well-being and recruitment and retention. Big focus on tackling the waiting list that has grown throughout the pandemic, particularly over the winter months, and elective recovery in response to that. Looking at how to enhance primary care capacity and also urgent and emergency care transformation, and to greater or lesser extents, they all have an impact on our services area, on our service areas. We're doing a lot of work at the moment in terms of developing our operational plan that's due to be submitted to the West Yorkshire ICS, and also our transformation and business plan priorities for the coming year. So in response to some of the national asks, we'll be taking forward the work that we've done on career pathways. The particular focus we've had on paramedic career pathways, expanding those into specialist and advanced paramedic roles, and also starting to look at nursing paramedic roles as well. Steve was talking earlier about the work that we're doing on culture in response to staff survey results that have come out and the RES results that have come out. There's particularly pinpoint areas around bullying and harassment. Tech had a really good presentation from Claire Ashby and Klaus Madsen on the work that's being done within the organisation to triangulate those and dig beneath organisational levels to those areas of the organisation where we need to do further work to embed the values and behaviours. We do face some risks in the wellbeing and retention area. If you look at the organisation and sickness levels, there are 1 or 2 areas, particularly contact centre environments for 111 and 999, where we're seeing very high levels of sickness absence. We need to get underneath that. We've started that work to understand, clearly 12 months into a pandemic, there's going to be a lot of fatigue. As we've talked about previously, services in the north of England have probably seen a disproportionate level of the impact of the pandemic compared to some other parts of the country. And we're also looking to see what we can do to mitigate the potential loss of specialist paramedics into primary care networks. And that's an area of work that we're advancing through our work with commissioners and taking forward developments in that area. Responding to the COVID pandemic, we've got the second stage of the vaccination programme nearing its end, and also work to think about our surge capacity and how we could potentially improve our resilience should we encounter another wave of the pandemic as we get into the winter months. So further developing that in the work that we're doing around developing the transformation program, which we'll bring back, but looking at areas of expanding our EOC capacity to see how we could again allow for that surge capacity. That's one of the areas that we're developing at TEG at the moment, and we've got a number of areas in relation to our estate and how we meet some of the challenges in bringing some of the staff back, albeit under new ways of working, with increased levels of remote working and potentially more agile working. So at TEG, we've had discussions around the potential to take on another site to support EOC training and potentially additional office space. And also, as you know, we've had the expansion of warehouse facilities to cope with the increased levels of PPE. So a lot going on in terms of COVID response, both in terms of the shorter term, but the longer term implications for the organisation. In terms of areas of focus around elective recovery, again, a lot of work going on within the transformation programme, and our priorities at the moment around built pathways and expanding our pathways into same-day emergency care, utilising urgent treatment centres, and we've discussed the mental health business case that we've had at board previously. But an area of concern during the first half of this year is PTS. Seeing quite high levels of activity at PTS, as we talked about, both in terms of on-day work and a return to more normal levels of business as usual. So as acute organisations step up their return to normal levels of diagnostic activity and outpatient activity, even allowing for the potential use of digital clinics, trying to manage that increased activity while still maintaining, in the short term at least, levels of social distancing, I think represents a particular challenge to the organisation. So we're taking forward those discussions with our commissioners, and in the paper I talk about the first meetings that we've had of the integrated commissioning framework and the Yorkshire and Humber clinical reference group that Julian's chaired. Really positive first meetings, and I'm really optimistic that that new approach to strategic planning with our commissioners is putting us in a really proactive and strong place to align to our 3 ICS systems and embrace some of the asks of the white paper on integrating care. We've got the ongoing implementation of unified comms. People will be aware this is to pick up on the risks that are identified in the risk register about our old telephony system. I think it's fair to say it's taken longer to bed unified comms down in 111 IUC than we originally thought. That's had a knock-on implication in terms of our rollout to EOC that's described in the paper. Just, you know, we all recognise the importance of making sure that we're not overstretching our teams. So we continue to work through that, and optimistic we'll get back on track shortly. Similarly, on the digital agenda, we're continuing discussions with Northern Ambulance Alliance partners about developing the business case for a common CAD system across the Northern Ambulance Alliance organisations. As lockdown measures have started to be released and pubs and restaurants taking bookings, we've seen an increase in capacity, and I'm sure Nick will talk about this more. But you can see the impact that that's had in terms of some of our response times, given the longer call cycle time we've got in operation due to some of the changes that we've had to make to accommodate changes in policy and practice due to the pandemic, but also some of the challenges in terms of hospital capacity that we're seeing around acute partners, as well as they struggle to bring back elective activity as well as cope with, albeit declining, levels of COVID-related activity. So a number of challenges, but I think we're coping very well with that. And as I say, I think we've done a huge amount of work over the last sort of couple of months, both in relation to the transformation programme, our planning, and our relationships with our commissioners, to put us on a strong footing for the remainder of the year. So That's all I wanted to say on that part of the report, Kath. Happy to
Thanks, Rod.
take any questions or hand over to Nick to talk about A&E operations.
Thanks, Rod. As you say, we're coping well with a lot of challenges, and I think that's a good place to be. Jeremy.
Yeah, Rod, on the vaccination front, Rod, I think you said 79% of staff have been vaccinated. I think in Nick's report it says 83% of operational staff have been done. Do we know how many actual hands-on clinical staff have been vaccinated? I mean, that's probably an impossible question to answer, but the second one is, have there been any discussions around making the vaccination compulsory for frontline staff?
In response to the first question, Jeremy, yes, we do have a detailed breakdown of vaccination by staff groups, and Julian and the vaccination team do monitor that on a regular basis.
Right.
And I'll hand over to Julian in a sec. In relation to making the vaccination compulsory, as you're aware, I mean, there have been some discussions about that played out through the national press. That hasn't come to fruition. There isn't any strict guidance to make the vaccination mandatory. We are following up with one-to-one conversations with those staff who aren't having the vaccine to try and persuade them of the importance of doing that. But Julian's done a lot more work in this area. So, Julian, are you happy to add anything to that?
Yep, sure. I've just pulled up the BI report. So from the frontline A&E staff, 3,795 were vaccinated out of a total staff count of 4,478, and in urgent care, so that includes the PTS, 1,476 out of 1,759. So those have then gone forward for their booster, which we're now almost at the end of our round of booster jabs, and of all staff, 91.5% who received their first dose have now been vaccinated with their second dose. So we've got drill downs onto all of that, and now particularly with the second dose, those that are reluctant to come forward, we're individually chasing.
Thank you.
And just on that point, Jeremy, the 79% that's quoted in my part of the report was for staff having their second vaccine. So right. Julian's just given them an up-to-date figure than the one I put in the report.
Changes all the time. Thank you. There's a question from Andrew in the chat box. Could somebody answer it in the chat box, please, unless you'd like to hang it over till the private meeting this afternoon. Right, okay. Thanks, Rod. We're starting with Nick, did you say?
If that's okay, Kath. Nick?
Yeah, okay. We'll pick up later on, Kath, that's okay. I can give an update.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so from a 999 perspective then, so since the last board meeting, pressure has slightly eased, and we've obviously got tremendous challenges, as everybody's aware. The biggest impact, positive impact, has been on the COVID absence, which has decreased for operational staff, both from a sickness perspective, but also from a shielding point of view as well. There's a graph in my section of paper that shows, it's quite an interesting graph that way. It shows the peaks that we've experienced during the year within there. So that's positive. Community rates are dropping, as Rod covered, but Yorkshire continues to be the highest region. It moves around each day, but we've really got quite a few areas of Yorkshire that are still high, which means that ASAP have to be really vigilant and obviously continue with the PPE and the challenges that they have there as well, so social distancing. So so it is a Northern England challenge, particularly within Yorkshire. Onto capacity, I've covered that around. We've seen an increase in available hours, which helps, which links directly into our ability to provide the service. But we started to see an increase, which has already been covered off, around the non-COVID absence. Specifically within our EOC, we've started to see those figures go back up again. Not so much in frontline, although we've started to see that change taking place. And as already been mentioned, we're doing a lot of work around that to actually understand some of those reasons why, and to get back into normal levels again. Handovers. When did the paper? The situation probably is deteriorating week by week with handover delays, and it's very sporadic. It depends on which areas, different times. So, time of the paper, South Yorkshire, Basset Law area seem to be a particular challenge. But every day it seems different hospitals are having significant pressures and changing week to week. For example, on Monday last week, lost 36 hours of halt. The week before it was 6 hours. So some incredible variability around that, and probably a lot of it's down to the result of some of the community pressures down there as well. But yeah, it's not an improving position with the handover delays. Demand has, unsurprisingly, it has increased on 12th of April when the lockdown eased, the first stage of that. Watching that really carefully around what happened, and around about tea time, about 4 p.m, there was a significant start to increase in demand, and a lot of that was related to alcohol-related incidents, mental health. We just saw a big increase in that. I was fearing the worst. That may increase later on into the week, but we saw it settle down a little bit. Although we have seen now, every day we're exceeding 2,000 responses, sometimes 2,100 responses, which is back in line with pre-COVID levels that we would experience within there. Obviously, we're looking forward. Well, not looking forward, but we're planning for the 17th of May, and the impact of that. That's going to be a big change as well within there. So build that into our plans for resourcing hours out there. So that's a key day for us. Rod mentioned about job cycle time. So that job cycle time is one of the key influences on our ability to make response times. Over the last 12 months, it's increased by 6 minutes, job cycle time. So that's a point of allocating the call to the point it becomes available again to respond to the next call. A number of reasons for that. Anybody who's been travelling recently knows what the traffic's like, especially this week. We're back to normal levels with traffic, so the mobilisation to scene times increased. Time on scenes increased as well. Time to hospitals increased. Handover to arrival to handovers increased, and handover to clears increased. So all these things incrementally have quite a significant impact on our job cycle time. And from a numbers point of view, you usually quote every minute equates to around 40 staff. So it doesn't sound a lot, but when you look at the number of attendances that we do each day, it is significant. The impact on performance, you can see throughout the year that the performance has been really significant variability throughout the year with performance. At the end of the March, for the category 1 mean, we missed the target by 37 seconds, and for category 2, we exceeded by 2.5 minutes. So it's been a very, very difficult year, and some real highs and lows within there. And currently, from mid-March to where we are now, we have seen some challenges around our performance, which have already been covered off. Other key things to pick up around AOC, back into Q3 with the significant mutual aid that we received and the pressures there, is significantly improving our AOC, apart from obviously seeing the increase in the non-COVID. But the number of hours every day within AOC is high. Our compliance with the service level agreement is high. The odd days when we see a challenge, big peaks in demand, but generally much better position down there. And allowing us now to learn from what we went through in October, November time to build in additional resilience. We've recruited more staff, a lot more flexibility in the staff, matching rotas, market to demand. And the big piece of work we're currently focused on now is increasing our business continuity, our capacity. So looking at York specifically, we've looked at a number of options around what we can do around balancing the workload. So if we did lose a particular area, then we're able to pick that up elsewhere. So over the next 12 months, well, the next few months to 12 months, we'll be increasing capacity at York within there. And just some other key team-based working. That's been a challenge. We've done a lot of work. We then have challenged around job evaluation process. We've had a number of meetings last week, and we've now got a way forward with trade unions around that, which now allows us to move further on with team-based working, which is critical to our future. Well, change the culture where we operate and process and so on. A couple of other things to pick out. We're working trade unions to implement extending the meal break window which prevents increases availability of crews. But on the other side, making sure that we're looking at opportunities to allow staff to finish on time more often than they currently are. When people work in an 11, 12-hour shift in difficult circumstances, then we're going to look at a way of trying to protect the end of the shift. We're doing that in a way that balances that against, obviously, patient risk, and we want to make sure that we don't impact on patient risk by doing this. That means there'll be a number of rota changes needed at some stations, but working close with trade unions, we think we can come to a satisfactory outcome on that one. And then just pick up some of the risks that I highlighted in the paper around team-based working. It is critical. We did have a problem. We started to overcome that problem with trade unions, but we're closely on that one. And then the impact of easing and demand. And so it's like the perfect storm, isn't it? Increasing demand, probably higher or to levels that we had previously, but with an increased job cycle time, it's going to be a challenge. So, and I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you, Nick. It's never easy, is it? Jeremy.
Thanks, Kath. No, it's not easy. Nick, not now, but at some point in the future. Can we have an update on the conversations we had probably about 18 months ago, around this end of shift and meal break stuff? You know, so I think just because I'm kind of lost. I didn't know where that went, and it'd be just interesting to get an update in terms of where we are on that at some point in the future.
Absolutely, yeah. Can update on that.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Jeremy. Tim. You on mute, Tim?
Sorry, my microphone didn't unmute. Yeah, all it was, Nick, you sort of, I don't know if it was my connection, but it wasn't very clear to me with team-based working and some hold up on job evaluation. You didn't finish off what you were saying. Is that sorted? Is it very close to being sorted? Is it still being protracted? So what's going on with it?
Well, we had, a lot of progress being made on team-based working and the new role of a team leader. It's fundamental to our way forward.
Yeah.
As you know, we have clinical supervisor role, which is currently about 6. Going back a number of years, there was a job evaluation request was put in. We've been dealing with that for quite a long time now.
And when you say quite a long time, what's quite a long time?
Suzanne, yeah, about a couple of years, I think, Suzanne, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, November 2018, I think. So quite a considerable number of years.
We got to a point where we had resolution on that, Tim, and that allowed us to start to move forward again. But then we weren't able to secure the process in a satisfactory way for trade unions and ourselves. So that prevented us from moving forward. We had a meeting facilitated through ACAS last week, really successful meeting. And now we're back into full evaluation and green light given trade union support of us to move forward with team-based working. So currently are. Okay. It's a complex, probably not for now.
All right, it's certainly really not for now. Now, I think once we get moving, we maybe need to have it. But I would like to, you know, as an ex-HR person myself, something taking 2 years, and it needed ACAS to unblock it. It all just seems very unsatisfactory to me. We won't protract it now, but I just want to flag it that I'd like to understand. Maybe, you know, alongside Jeremy and the meal breaks, we could cover both.
Yeah, can do that. Yeah, but there's a number of steps and things.
Yeah. I'm sure, and I'm sure it certainly hasn't been easy. But anyway, all right. Thanks, Kath. That was it.
Thank you, Tim. And it may be, Nick, that you want a one-to-one with Tim at some point just to explain or Suzanne does the processes we've been through. It's just good to see we have some, we're through it, and that our trade union colleagues are at the table and we're moving forward properly now. So good news. And any more questions to Nick? A lot of things on your plate at the moment, Nick, and appreciate that it's tough as I think the big message for me coming out all of that is the pandemic may be slowing down and we may be seeing lockdown ease, but that doesn't mean the life is getting actually easier.
No.
So yeah, a lot of challenges still there. Right, thanks, Rod. Back to you.
Thanks, Kath. Karen, anything by exception you want to cover off in IUC or PTS?
Yeah, thanks, Rod. Just a couple of things, if I may. You've already mentioned the sickness, Rod, in IUC, so I won't dwell on that. But just to say, the good news is we've now got all the shielders who were due to return now back in place. It did take a little bit longer than we'd expected because some of them had been out obviously for so long with the shielding period that they were out of their NHS Pathways licence, so had to go through some degree of retraining, refamiliarisation with all the updates that have been happening through Pathways through the pandemic. The other thing that I just wanted to highlight, I know we're a bit short on time, Kath, but there's an NHS England graph on page 13 which really highlights the national change in profile by hours of activity, hours of the day. And I think it's fair to say that that's probably one of the most significant things that we've seen change through the pandemic. Predominantly pre-pandemic, IUC was an out-of-hours service. You can see from the graph that we're rapidly becoming an in-hours service.
Absolutely.
With peaks twice a day now, usually one between 7:30, 8:30 on a morning, and then another one from 6 o'clock in the evening, tailing off about 9, 10 o'clock. And I think going forward, in terms of our planning, our assumptions, it's really difficult to know how long that will last for, if that is a sustained behaviour change in the population, or whether that's something that we'll see return to a pre-COVID kind of profile. But I think what it does highlight is that the public are using 111 more to access healthcare. And, you know, the access through GPs seems to be reducing, and we're getting more calls through the whole course of the 24-hour period rather than just out of hours. And then the other thing that I just wanted to highlight was the average handling time. We have seen a significant increase in the average handling time for all calls through the pandemic. Our year started with a plan for 525 seconds per call. We're currently at 590 per call. Nationally, it's above 600. So that was the other thing that I just wanted to flag, because obviously, again, if that's sustained, that's going to have implications on our capacity and the staffing requirements that we'll need going forward to manage those calls. So looking ahead, really, I think forecasting is very difficult. Our assumptions are quite difficult to come up with to profile the activity. And in addition to that, there's the new KPIs as well that we're having conversations about. How do we implement those to a trajectory to make sure that we will hit them eventually. And then in terms of PTS, currently at 81% business as usual. Discharges still remaining above 100%, above normal activity levels. And as Rod's already said, the scale and pace of the elective return to normal business is obviously going to have an impact on us. And in our assumptions, what we're assuming is that we'll probably start to see 100% business as usual from sometime between July and September. And we've made assumptions around the single patient journey will probably last until about July, but maybe come back again in the autumn. Julian's obviously advising us on that one. And then that's probably all I wanted to flag, really, in terms of those two service lines.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Just from me, obviously there's an awful lot of publicity out there about phoning 111 first in an attempt to reduce A&E attendance or unnecessary A&E attendance. What else I'm picking up is that we might be increasing in our calls, but I'm not seeing much around a reduction in A&E attendance, because there's been plenty of the acute trusts out this week desperately saying, please don't come unless you need to.
Yeah.
So our increase in 111 calls doesn't seem to be having that effect in the hospitals. Is that true, do you think? It's only what I'm picking up from social media, to be fair.
And one of the things that kind of Nick and I are also having a look at through IUC is we are seeing an increase in the number of patients who now come out of 111 assessment with an ED disposition,
Right. Okay.
or a 999 disposition, and it's one of the things that's just causing us some concern that it's actually currently sitting that over a quarter of patients who phone 111 are ending up with an ED or a 999 disposition. So it's obviously something that we're looking at with our BI team to see if we can understand what's causing that rise.
Yeah.
But I'll kind of pinch Julian's point from the other day that he made, I thought really well, was around if we're increasing here and treat, what's left needs to go to hospital.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the other part of this. Sorry, Julian, I stole your moment there.
Thank you, Karen. Any more questions to Karen? Oh, Steve.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It was just around the intraday profile, Karen. I was just assuming we can secure the right resources overall to meet the demand. That change in profile could actually be helpful to us if it's sustained, because it may well help us to smooth out some of the anomalies that we have in our shift patterns that are so unpopular with staff.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely, because we know that the out of hours shifts and the 6 out of 8 weekends is unpopular, whereas if we do get more demand during the day, we can dilute that.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question from Andrew in the box, because the other thing is been some discussion nationally really about the fact that the hospital waiting list issue, which has built up during the pandemic, this massive backlog in elective work, and people not presenting on time because, as somebody said earlier, this fear of going to hospital during the pandemic, that in fact we're seeing more serious calls and indeed an increase in calls as people have waited until such time as they can't wait any longer. That seems to be borne out really with what you're saying, Karen, that we're getting a lot of people who really do need to go to hospital or do need a 999 response actually through 111.
Yeah. The other thing just probably to say about the IUC activity is it is still very volatile and is very influenced by media and what's happening with the COVID vaccine. So, for example, when there was the noise a couple of weeks ago around the AstraZeneca safety, we saw a huge surge in calls around people ringing with headaches and symptoms of clots, and it's very, very volatile still.
Yeah. No, I'll take your point. Thank you. Back to Rod.
Thanks, Kath. Julian, is there anything that you'd like to raise by exception? Perhaps whether you want to touch on Andrew's point around potential for a further wave?
Yes, certainly. And just what Karen said segues quite nicely into things. We are. If you strip away the proportions and look at the raw numbers, we're signposting more and more people to alternatives other than ED, but now people are emerging from their homes and the demand is going up. So the proportions aren't changing, although the amount of work that we're doing in terms of successfully moving people into signposting people into different places, it is. In terms of the next wave, there's his name's Adam Finn. He's one of the professors on JCVI, has suggested that middle of July we may well see another rise in cases if the government's pathway out of lockdown is the dates remain as they are. What that translates into, though, with a vaccinated population in terms of hospitalisations and deaths is another matter. So it is very much a matter of waiting and seeing whether we'll get a rise in the summer. I think what's more significant from our perspective will be autumn into winter and a seasonal surge in the same way that we see flu, especially if the path out of lockdown is successful and the population starts mixing again over the summer months. So I think we just need to be ready for restrictions to be put back into place. and certainly the way we work remains restricted going back into next winter. So that's from that perspective. Just from sort of my part of this report, we've already talked about the Safe Right Care Right Place project, and that's key really to a lot of the conversation we've just had, and that's progressing well. And then also just to point out that the National Institute of Health Research has now pushed the local clinical research networks into their recovery and growth phase. So not just the COVID work, but to try and restore normal research. So YAS is restarting a lot of the research work that we paused over the pandemic. So it's a very busy time in the research agenda as well.
Thank you, Julian. Any questions to Julian? I can't help but feeling that the projections around the next wave are probably true, but I feel really bad that the fact that I believe that. I sort of feel as though I shouldn't believe that, but I do. Thanks, Julian. Who's next, Rod?
I don't know whether Steve wants to draw anything out by exception or whether he feels he's talked enough.
Everybody else probably feels I've talked enough. Just very, very quickly then, Rod, the IPC, I think obviously the workload has calmed down for that team as we've gone through the pandemic, but I do expect, just reflecting Julian's comments, that they will come into play again very significantly as we go through the year, and certainly around how we get back to get staff back to work in a kind of flexible and agile way as well. And then just around some positive developments, I mentioned the recruitment of the subject matter expert in moving and handling earlier, but the other development that is born out of a pilot that was conducted last year is around the Pediatric Liaison role. And this is specialised staff to pick up paediatric patients who are frequent callers to our services, and in order to support case management and liaison with other services as well. That role, we're recruiting into those posts now substantively, and that role will be subsumed within the safeguarding team going forward.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks very much. Any further questions to Steve? Really interesting, that paediatric role. It is. It's good stuff, is that one. Thank you. Right. Okie dokie.
Suzanne.
Thanks, Chair. So, and obviously there's already been some quite a number of discussions around sickness and health and wellbeing in the vaccination programme. So, don't intend to cover that off in any kind of detail. And it is in the paper also. But we have seen obviously non-COVID absence go up as COVID absences come down, and we are doing some focus work on that particular area, which also includes bringing a new sickness absence policy and some new absence training, as well as implementing the next stage of Impactus, which is the case manager module, which is coming in the next couple of months. So hopefully that should make some difference. Also, I think Karen mentioned it around welcoming the return of our shielding staff, which make quite a considerable difference. I think some of those staff have really struggled with mental health at home, so there is some ongoing issues there, but of course we're supporting those as much as we can. We've also got some signs now of some long COVID absences, so there is some support coming through Optima, which will bring in a report to go through that. On the positive side, diversity and inclusion, we've got some really good work happening there. We've started our work with Stonewall in terms of becoming an LGBTQ+ friendly workplace, and we've got an action plan that's going through there. And also the reverse mentoring pilot scheme has started also with some of our executive colleagues, and I know that a number of you on this call have started that. Of course, I reported at the last Trust Board around our gender pay gap data, so I don't intend to go through there, but that will be put on our website, and there were some positive outcomes in terms of that also. And finally, just around, and I think Klaus would kick me if I didn't mention it, in terms of us winning gold at the Learning Awards earlier in the year around our apprenticeship programme. So very proud of that work that the team undertook there. Very much a team effort though in terms of our apprenticeships. So thank you.
It was a stunning result. Was the apprenticeship programme result, and please do pass the boards. Congratulations for that award. Back to that team, Suzanne, because it was just stunning to see it come through, and absolutely deserved with the apprenticeship programme at YAS, which say we deserve that gold award. We know it's not as though they awarded us it for nothing. We've done some fabulous work, so thank you. Any further questions to Suzanne? No, thank you. Thanks, Suzanne. Thanks for the report.
Okay, thanks, Kath. Over to Catherine for update on finance, fleet and estates.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My update's really covered by the items later on the agenda. I think the rest of it is in the paper. So if you'd like to wait to hear my voice, then I'm on quite a bit on later on in the agenda.
We always love to hear you, Catherine. That's not a problem. You've got Catherine's report, and yeah, very good to see. Good news about the new warehouse in procurement. I mean, it's not something we talk about much, is it, our procurement team? But good to see that they've got some more space, Catherine. I thought
it's really brilliant, and certainly the staff who work in procurement and logistics have described it as a game changer. And it is, if any of you've been to the old facility and the new facility,
the old one,
yeah. Well, they're not comparable. It's a really, really good facility, and it'll enable us to manage our stock much more efficiently. It's great.
Yeah, good. That's good news. And they're not down that little dark alley anymore, which is equally good news, I think.
It's good news for going to visit them.
Absolutely, it is. Yes, it is. If people didn't know where they were, you know, where Spring Hill 1 is, if there's a sort of a tree-lined lane a little bit further down, and not exactly the best place to be walking down when the evenings get dark, to be fair. Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks, Kath. Just picking up on this fleet running session to consider the next base rapid response vehicle. Are they going electric? Would be my first question. And the second question is, what criteria are we using for RRV? Is it kind of vehicle carrying capacity in terms of kit, or is it something to do with the performance of the vehicle?
I think Nick's coming in.
Is that all right, Catherine?
Yes, please do.
Right, okay. Yeah, we currently, for a while, we've been evaluating different types of vehicles. The main criteria is space carrying of kit on the vehicles. We've got to make sure that we've got space to do that. It's been a challenge, I think, over previous times. The other aspect is to maintain our severe weather availability as well. So can we look at all-wheel drive options within there? And then finally look at a portion of, can we look at how we can reduce our emissions on there as well. So what we're trying to do is look at a balance. So there may be, hopefully what we want to do is to have a number of electric vehicles, but it depends on infrastructure. I think practically it's going to be hybrid at this moment in time. So all that's been evaluated. We've got a group of people who people actually drive the vehicles, been engaged with health and safety. We've got the fleet to identify what the preferred vehicle will be.
Yeah, we'll look forward to that.
Yeah, it's just a concern about, you know, with the amount of weight that these vehicles carry and the speed that we ask them to, you know, the response that we ask them to make. You know, I think there's got to be some consideration about the capability of the vehicle.
Yeah, that's and that's where the fleet guys come into it as well, to make sure they're safe. A lot of work being done as well from a clinical perspective around to make sure that the kit that is being carried is the right type of kit as well. The type of bags that they're carrying, things like that. So it's all these things together to come up with something that we believe is the right option. So the group will then provide a number of options, and I'll take that through our process then to what is the vehicle. Yeah. There's also the cost as well, obviously, that has an impact on it. So all these things together till there's identified what the best options are.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Nick. Any further questions to Catherine at this point? She says you will be seeing her again. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Catherine.
Okay.
Thanks, Catherine. Simon, anything that you want to cover off by exception?
No, well, I think you've mentioned the unified comms piece, which is clearly difficult and challenging for us at the moment, and that will probably be about it.
Thanks, Simon. And finally, from me, just to recognise that, despite the constraints of social distancing and remote working, we successfully held the STARS Awards, and really good attendance online for those. Some fantastic efforts on behalf of individuals and teams, and also we held our first Prince's Trust volunteer event, and we've had a really brilliant feedback from both the Prince's Trust and the individuals who took part in that programme. So looking forward to doing more of those in future. That's it from me, Kath. If people are happy to receive the report and the IPR for March.
Thanks, Rod. I don't know how many of you were at the STARS Award. I'd just like to, publicly congratulate the team that put that together, because it's not easy to do an award ceremony online. It's not the same as being in a nice hotel with everybody there. But it did work very, very well. Other than Rod and I all dressed up at 9:30 in the morning that's interesting, particularly when my postman came. But it did work really well, and I think everybody enjoyed it. And I hope the people who received awards didn't feel as though they'd had some sort of second-hand event. I think it worked as well as it possibly could have done in the circumstances. But we will look forward to being back into a hotel room with everybody present, hopefully in next year. Fingers crossed. And I was part of the Prince's Trust week. I know Rod went in himself, but it was an absolute joy. It really was, to be part of that that week and talk to those young people. So yeah, roll on the next one. Thank you. And we have got the recommendations at 5.1, which hopefully you will agree. Thank you, Catherine. I just read Catherine's comment in the chat box. My postman getting me at the door in sort of full glitz at 9:30 in the morning. I'm fairly sure he thought I was vaguely insane, and then I tried to explain, which sort of just made it worse. But thank you for that. It was fun getting dressed up. So can we agree the recommendations at 5.1? Yes. Thank you. Thanks, Rod. Good report. Thank you. And we are now back on time, which is smashing. Thanks. The service transformation report. We're back to Steve.
Thank you, Ken. I think we can be pretty brief on this this report, because we've covered a lot of the items through previous parts of the discussion. But the report in the appendix gives the progress on the transformation programme as it currently stands, operating through the existing programme boards. I think there's been positive movement generally across the programme in areas like hub and spoke, ADP and the warehouse. Number of areas of the urgent and emergency care programme, including the mental health developments, some positive movement around the rotational paramedic role planning, and some good work around the EOC toolkit and the implementation of the PACS system. And I think in the next couple of weeks we've got coming to the executive group some materials around the development of our remote clinical workforce for us to discuss. So lots of positive movement. There are just a small number of issues for escalation highlighted in the dashboard, which we've touched on. Unified comms already. The N365 kind of migration is impacted by unified comms because of the need for the IT team to focus on unified comms primarily, but also impacted by some of the external requirements for that development. And then finally, the team-based working progress, which we touched on earlier in relation to the discussions with the trade unions. In terms of the more general development, there's a full review of the transformation programme that's progressing very well, as Rod said, through the executive discussions, and that will be moving forward very shortly on that, and with a programme that's well aligned to the wider business plan and also to the external developments of the integrated commissioning framework that Rod mentioned with our ICS partners. And alongside that, we're developing the approach to programme leadership and assurance and the role of the PMO in that process. So I think by the time we get to the next board meeting, we may well be presenting something more concrete around the new way of operating in the programme. I think I'll leave it at that for today, if that's okay. I'm just happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Steve. Just good to receive an update. Anyone any questions to Steve on the Service Transformation Programme report? Everybody content? In that case, the recommendations are that we note the progress made, note the use of the PMO documentation to support and enable delivery of change programmes, and note developments to the approved PMO model. Can we agree those? Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. And over the page, we're back to Catherine. Update on financial performance and planning. Catherine, please, at 5.3.
Okay, thank you. So I've got a brief presentation to share with you. Juliana's going to put that on screen for me. The purpose of the presentation is twofold. Firstly, I just want to give you a brief update on performance at the end of 2021 and the position that's going to be reflected in the draft accounts that you will receive in due course. And then secondly, I want to talk to you about financial planning for 21-22. Obviously, you'd normally have a very detailed plan to have approved by now, but as we know, planning was delayed and contracting remains suspended. So we've got slightly different arrangements. So I don't have the detailed financial plan yet for you, but I do have an update on where we've got to and the next steps in that process. So next slide, please. So it's just to say that it's literally just this slide on the year-end performance at the moment. We're in the process of closing down the accounts and the draft accounts will be submitted on Tuesday. So our plan was to achieve a 1.754 deficit, but we've actually, in the the latter weeks of the year, there's been a number of improvements against that plan, unexpected improvements. So largely that's due to income that we received in recent weeks, which we weren't anticipating. All providers have received income in relation to these items. So everyone was funded for the additional carried over annual leave that's been allowed by extending the number of days. If you recall, when we set the plan, there was a difference between our provider assumptions on other income that they would be able to generate through things like private events, car park income, etc., and national assumptions. So nationally, that original gap has now been funded, so everyone's received income in relation to that. And then there's also been the national agreement in relation to flowers. And so we've all received income to cover the costs of the 2 years that national agreement covers. That's a significant amount of income that, as I say, we weren't anticipating. In addition to that, in terms of further improvements to the plan, you know, I've described to you before that forecasting has been really difficult this year because there's not really been any trends to follow. It's been a very unusual year. We've incurred a lot of cost in PTS in terms of the use of private providers, but our estimates for the last few weeks of the year were a bit higher than we actually saw in terms of cost. And we've also received higher levels of insurance rebate than we originally anticipated. So they all result in really significant improvements to the position. However, in terms of an offset to that, we've also undertaken a review of provisions, which has altered the position significantly as well in the other direction. Now, there's that covers some areas that are quite sensitive. So if I may, I'd like to just talk to you briefly about that in private board later. But just for the moment to say that, yeah, just to say that for overall, what that means is that our adjusted financial performance against the plan is a deficit of 960k, so just a bit better than the original plan. So that's where we expect the accounts to end up when they're submitted on Tuesday. So, I'm now coming on to the financial planning. So does anybody have any questions on the year-end position before I move on?
Thank you. Everyone content so far?
Yep.
Yep. Thank you, Catherine. On we go.
Okay. What I've set out here is I've got just 3 slides. I've set out one on income and how our income is going to be made up for the first half of 21-22. Then I've set out a slide on expenditure and the underlying main assumptions in that, and then just a slide on the where that leaves us and the next steps. So firstly, with this, it's just to say that we do, as we did in the second half of last year, we continue to receive most of our funding, our block funding, from all CCGs. We've assumed that we receive the same as we did in H2 last year, plus inflation as per the planning guidance. And then in addition to the CCG income, we do receive a small amount from NHSI directly for dental services, NARU, etc. Another feature of the COVID regime was a system top-up funding, and we continue to get that, and that's going to be rolled forward the same figure as H2 in last year. We're also expecting to receive some mental health investment. Now it's been confirmed that this investment sits in all CCGs, so it's across the 3 ICSs in our footprint, not just the one that we work through for financial planning. In conjunction with our lead commissioner, we've sent correspondence to all CCGs advising them of their share of the £2.6 million annual cost of the business case that's been to board previously. It's not certain that that will be agreed, but at least if the funding's identified in plans, that will help going forward. In terms of 111 First, funding's been allocated to the lead CCG for that. However, what we've noticed in the detail is that the income only reflects Q1 costs, not the full half year that the plan reflects. So that leaves us with about a 700k gap at the moment, and we're working through that with commissioners to understand how that income will be provided to us. You'll see on the next slide how we've treated expenditure. In terms of COVID funding, that's come via the ICS. We've all agreed, the system partners within the ICS, that we will roll forward the figures from the original H2 plan. So for us, at that point, it doesn't include the additional £2 million that we negotiated later on in the year. However, the next point is that the ICS was also allocated an amount for system top-up and COVID growth, effectively inflation on those allocations. And for West Yorkshire ICS, that totaled £1.64 million. And it's been agreed by all the partners that all of that funding should come to YAS, because they recognise that the pressures that we were under that led to the original additional £2 million request are still there. We will still continue to see those pressures. So we've agreed that as additional funding. And then there's some other small adjustments that are based on central national formula that total about £500,000. So that's where our income's coming from for H1. So this next slide is the expenditure side of things. Now we're entirely responsible for developing this ourselves, as we would normally with any financial plan. We do that in line with guidance, and we do that in line with local knowledge and understanding of where we're at and the pressures that we're under. So this just runs through the main elements of that. So we've rolled forward all our pre-COVID recurrent budgets effectively, and we've added on inflation. But at this point, we've added nothing on for the pay award because that's not been finally agreed. But when it is, we would anticipate, as normal, being funded separately for that. So it's just that we've reflected on an individual basis all the incremental drift that is seen under Agenda for Change. We've then adjusted for demand in all service lines, and this is underpinned by work with colleagues throughout the trust, and that's still under review. and then I've just included a little bit of detail on each service. So within 999, we've included all the agreed investments. We've funded additional staff in EOC and additional scheduling posts, for example. In PTS, as Karen's already described, we've assumed that single patient journeys will continue to July, and then we'll move to more cohorting. And then we're also reviewing the impact of potential increases in elective activity. In 111, we've included the impact of the new KPIs and the resource requirement and costs associated with that. 111 first, even though, as I said on the previous slide, the income only covers Q1, we know we will incur the costs for the full year. So we've put the full H1 costs in there, and we hope to resolve the income issue. We've made a number of decisions throughout the year, some in board, some at TEG, depending on the value. And some of those decisions have consequences, recurrent consequences. So all those decisions are reflected in terms of the investment and pre-commitments made from 2021. We've also identified cost pressures, as we normally do. The financial management team have identified cost pressures. There's some significant ones this year. You recall the paramedic rebanding, which has been a kind of an issue on the finance agenda for some years. So the paramedics were rebanded from a 5 to a 6. Last year, they all moved on at the same time onto an increment, which saw a really significant pay increase, way above the rate of inflation. And as a result, the block value that we received in the COVID regime was adjusted to reflect that. Now, in 21-22, we see the tail end impact of that. So that pressure continues, and there's an additional 2 million costs over the full year. And there is no way of recovering income to cover that. It will have to be met through this overall envelope. Moving out of the COVID finance regime, I think we'll have to revisit that as a cost pressure, but for now we're having to fund it from this envelope. You're all aware there's been this national agreement around flowers. The funding that we've received is to cover back pay, not costs going forward. Now, all providers will be impacted by this, but as you're aware already, the ambulance sector is more adversely affected than others. So we've got a big pressure there. And again, it's something to revisit in the future. And also our fleet insurance premiums are increasing. On top of all of that, we've set aside a contingency. I think that this aligns to what colleagues have spoken about earlier on in the agenda, specifically around unknown demand, another wave of COVID potentially, the pressure on the acutes to recover elective activity at significant levels, and they're being incentivised to do so. You know, we've already experienced the impact of the opening up the nighttime economy, and that's going to continue as we lift further out of lockdown. There's also potential for trade tariffs that you're not sure about, and just general supply and demand, given some of the supply chain issues that we see. So all of that is covered currently in the plan at some level. We've had to develop this in a fairly short space of time since the limited guidance came out. And because it's been delayed, it means that the finance team has been developing this at the same time as doing the accounts. And the accounts has to take priority, and that's what all organisations have said. But what that means is there's still quite a lot of review work to refine this. So if you just move to the next slide, please. So we've already submitted the first draft submission to the ICS based on the information I've just briefly gone through, and that gave us a £3 million deficit position. And overall, the ICS had a £20 million deficit. Now, I think as an organisation, we're fairly confident that our £3 million gap can be closed, at least to a significant extent. If not entirely, I think it can be significantly reduced. It's really because we haven't had time to go through and review some of the areas, and therefore we've erred on the side of caution. And I think already with the review already, it's reduced from the 3 million. And I think as an organisation, as an ICS with 16 organisations, we don't really feel that at this stage a 20 million deficit is anything to be overly concerned about, even though it's obviously a big number in itself. So we're going to continue to refine the plan. We'll have continued discussions with colleagues, and at TEG, we've had a number of discussions at TEG already. There's likely to be a peer review within the ICS, although, as I've said before, that's difficult because we're the only ambulance provider in the ICS, but there will be some kind of a peer review. Other directors of finance in the ICS, I suspect. And then there's a second draft due this week. So that we'll be going through more detail with TEG as to where we've got with that. The final trust draft goes to the ICS on the 3rd of May, and then they take a few days to consolidate that position, and they have to submit a final ICS plan on the 3rd of June, so that our detailed plan will come for board approval following some F&I discussions, and that will come in May. So that's where we're at with the plan. That's the end of the presentation. You will receive the detail finally in the planning paper when you are asked to approve it, but that's probably as much detail as I'm able to share today.
Thank you, Catherine. That was very easy to understand and very comprehensive. Thank you. Good report. May I ask if anyone has any questions? John.
Hi, Kath. Yeah, thank you, Catherine. It's clearly a work in progress. But I take comfort from there's no surprises in there. It's rolling forward what we already know, and you seem to have most, or if not all, bases covered in terms of cost escalation from prior years, etc. So I think we need to just sit down in early May and have a look at that in more detail as you get further refinement into that.
Yeah, definitely we'll do that, John.
Thanks, John. Any further questions to Catherine? As John has quite rightly said, this is work in progress, and you will get the final reports in due course. Yes, Rod.
Kath, just very quickly to support what Catherine said. I mean, the COVID regime and the holiday pay situation would be challenging enough in a normal year, but the very short timeline for planning and the fact that the planning timeline overlaps the annual accounts completion this year just makes it really, really challenging. So just well done to the team for doing as well as they have.
Thank you, Rod. It's a point well made.
Yeah, I'll pass that on. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are noting those updates from Catherine. Can we agree to do that? Yeah, thank you. Could we just take the capital plan then, Catherine, please?
Yes, so it's that's here for your formal approval. It has already had to be submitted to the ICS. I'll take the paper as read in terms of the detailed numbers, but there were just a few things I wanted to draw out because there's a few differences this year. I think it's broadly been recognised in the organisation that the allocation of capital in 2021 was quite complicated. There were a number of routes to access capital. Approval came late in the day, and it made even in-year planning really quite difficult. And other organisations felt the same way. So in recognition of that, the process has been simplified this year. Almost all capital will now be agreed within the West Yorkshire ICS in collaboration with our partner organisations. As part of that process, we had notified the ICS of a requirement for £14.2 million capital, and we were then notified of an indicative resource limit of 15.7, so £1.5 million more than we'd actually planned. So at that point, the overall ICS requirement was more than the total available for the ICS. So those organisations in the same position as us, including us, we all agreed, this was discussed at TEG, we all agreed to contribute our excess amounts to the system, and those organisations with the shortfall agreed to scale back their plans in order that we could balance as an ICS. And I think we all recognised, and I really support, that this is a useful way to approach capital allocations because it means we can direct funding to the areas that need it in different years, and it will facilitate longer term capital planning. So I think that's a good way forward. I think specific points to note for YAS are that the 21-22 plan reflects the mitigating actions which took place in 2021. You'll recall that we've made quite a lot of decisions around mitigating actions because of slippage, supply chain issues, etc. So where that's meant we've had to reprovide in next year or remove from next year, we have done. The £2 million for hub and spoke and the purchase of land in Hull and Scarborough has been reprovided. And there's also £1.5 million in the plan for schemes yet to be fully developed. a new central warehouse, the asset management system, etc. And in addition to that, there's also a significant contingency. So I guess the overall risk, if anything, is an upside risk to the plan in that, you know, expenditure's profiled quite heavily towards the end of the year, and there are significant levels of funds that are not fully committed and have worked up plans. So there is a risk we won't use all the capital available to us, although I think we do have a track record of managing that quite effectively through the capital monitoring, capital planning group, so I'm not overly concerned about that. So the plan's here for you to approve, as I said, but also just wanted you to note, as it's outlined in the paper, that there is an intention to improve the way we allocate resource internally and move away from just where depreciation generates funds and move towards a more weighted scoring system where we prioritise what we strategically want to invest in. And that, I think, is going to be facilitated by the simpler process within the ICS that I outlined at the beginning.
Yeah. Thank you, Catherine. All seems very sensible. Any questions on the capital programme report or statements? You're all content. The recommendations are at paragraph 6, which are to approve the 21-22 capital plan. Note the risks as Catherine has identified, and support the proposal outlined in 5.2 in respect of allocating future capital funding, and support the recommendations in 5.3. Can we agree those?
Yep.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. That's all very clear. Cheers. And we move to the items under risk management and internal control and the risk management report. Guess who's doing that? Hello, Steve. It's been ages since we had it.
Thank you, colleagues. We're pleased to know this is the last paper from me this morning. So this is the regular report to the board and on the corporate risk register and board assurance framework. And as with other reports, the content of this is aired in each of the committees in between board meetings. So shouldn't be too many surprises in here for board colleagues. I'll just flag one or two things rather than reading through the whole paper. In terms of new risks, starting in section 4, I'll just pick a couple of those out. The risk 302 that relates to the social distancing in call flex. This is a residual risk following the extensive work that we did to make modifications to our contact centre environments in EOC and IUC in response to COVID. We had other risks on the risk register which have been removed in the light of that work. This is the residual risk that remains in Coreflex because we couldn't quite complete all the work that we would have liked to have done. But I think we're satisfied that with these measures in place that we have a safe environment for staff, and I think that's evidenced by the control of COVID in those environments since the work that was done. Risk 318, the patches on CAD servers. I just want to flag that one because we had a discussion in the audit committee around the importance of this, and not just the immediate action that might be needed, but also having a clear programme to maintain patches as they were required. I think, Simon, you've shared a timetable, haven't you, that your team have been working on with EOC in terms of managing that forward. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. And then finally on new risks, just flagging this Scarborough reconfiguration of paediatric pathways risk. Obviously, this is specific, but against a backdrop of ongoing acute service reviews in that area. In terms of risks that have increased, there aren't any to report this time. Risks that have reduced, I'll just flag a couple there. The first being 179, the clinical waste contract. I think this is a good news story. We're satisfied that we've got more robust arrangements in place now around our clinical waste management with our current contractor, so that risk has been reduced accordingly. And similarly, the TranMan system, been very positive work on implementing the TranMan system and aligning it with some of our other internal systems. So and that was reported into TEG recently. So that's good to hear. In terms of counter fraud, bribery and corruption, that risk has been reduced in the light of work that's been carried out. But I think we did have a discussion around this one in the audit committee in the light of there's a new national standard that's been published in relation to counter fraud, and we'll be doing some further work around that fairly shortly. So we will review that risk again to see if there are any issues we need to take into account arising from the new standard. Then in terms the other risk, just to flag, I suppose, in terms of reduction, is risk 47 on page 9, diversity in decision making, and we had a bit of a discussion around this risk, and feel that maybe we've just run ahead of ourselves in this report in reducing the risk at this point. So we've got quite a bit of work on the go to support this agenda, but it's not all come to fruition yet. So we're going to kind of return the risk to its previous level until that work is completed. And then in terms of areas of emerging risk, I think we've touched on unified comms. I think there's a risk around Airedale Hospital. Generally, it's reference here to asbestos, but I think there's a wider risk around the fabric of Airedale Hospital that the system is focusing on at the moment, which could impact on us. And then the other one to flag here is around the levels of staff sickness that were referred to earlier, and the risk around staff well-being generally, which we will probably revisit and need to raise the risk rating on that one for next time round. In terms of broader developments, there's an internal audit review as part of the usual annual cycle into all things risk management, and that is due to report this week, and that will obviously play into our head of internal audit opinion shortly. And then on the board assurance framework, as you know, we only set that up really for this year, halfway through the year, so most of the risks are extremely current still. We will review it now for 21-22, and I think the main areas of likely development will be around just updating the content around the system level developments, the ICS developments and so forth, and then probably some update around the whole kind of recovery, new normal kind of movement, and the implications of that for the trust. I think that's all I wanted to cover in terms of headlines from the report, but obviously the details in the risk register and the board assurance framework itself that sits behind the paper. So happy to take any questions on any content.
Thank you, Steve. Where's the nearest alternative to Airedale?
That's a good question. I don't think there is a very near alternative, is there?
I was thinking.
No. Julian, Nick, Nick, you've got a map behind you.
I missed the question.
The nearest alternative to Airedale.
Bradford,
won't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And Harrogate, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. It sort of sits somewhere in the middle, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh well, just cross.
Consult's map. There you go.
Blackburn.
Thanks, Nick. Any further questions to Steve on the risk report and Bath? Everybody happy? The recommendations are at 8.1. You can read them. Can we agree those? And could somebody please answer Andrew's question in the chat box? Thank you. Oh, thanks, Rod. And thanks very much for that. Thanks, Steve. You can relax now and grab a drink and rest your throat. Thank you. and we move to 6.2, the EPRR and Special Operations 6-monthly report. Nick, please.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. It's a really detailed report, so I think you'll be pleased I'm not going to go through all of it. I'm just going to pick out some key points from the report. So what this does, it takes us from up until the 31st of March this year, the previous 6 months. It's for to update the board, but also provide assurance as well against a number of areas. So, I mean, I've been working with Anne quite closely on this because she's the lead now. So trying to get Anne involved in some of the work that we've been doing, especially around the business continuity ISO standard. She's been attending some of those meetings, which has been really helpful. So some of the key points. And so the first thing is, I probably mentioned this before, but when we recruited John Olden, who was the head of emergency preparedness, resilience and response, I wanted him to undertake a review of the department to look at how it was all structured. It's quite a complex, lots of different areas being between different parts. John's done that, and he's now got a planned structure that is going through the change management process, do a following process for that. So that looks really good, a lot clearer accountability reporting process going through. We've also arranged for an independent review of the Yorkshire Ambulance clinical model. We've appointed Alistair Wilson, OBE, who's got is a retired A&E consultant from London, and also been medical director with the East of England Air Ambulance. We wanted to, because of the relationship with the Yorkshire Ambulance charity, we want to make sure it was somebody who had that full credibility and that independence to do that piece of work. There's not that many people around who have that level of experience because it's such a small area. So we've been really fortunate to secure his services. So that'll be starting very shortly within there. The recommendation then will be shared to the partnership board, and then depending on what the outcomes that are, says whether changes need to be made or not. But we'll just wait for the outcome of that review. Probably looking ahead, one of the biggest challenges we've got going forward is something called Option 12. Which is the response to terrorist incidents. I mean, I can give some briefings around this in more detail. But effectively what it means that we need to train around 290 of our staff to be able to respond to these incidents where it may occur. We can only have a requirement to have 10 to 12 people who are trained at any one time on duty. That's going to go quite significantly up to around 30 that need to be available. So that's going to be a real challenge for the next 12 months around training and combining different roles. So you'll probably hear a lot more about that, and we'll have to bring something back to board later on around Option 12. We've just completed a top management review of the ISO 22301 business continuity standard. We're in a really good place with the trust with the business continuity. Angela Verland's done a really good job for many years, got a lot of credibility outside of the organisation as well. So what we have to do is to undertake a top level review of that to make sure the processes we have in place around that and the way that it's led and utilised is in a good place. Ready for assessment taking place in June. We've just completed that top management review, and I think we're in a really good place then for the review coming through and the assessment. And as I said earlier, Anne's been involved in that. And obviously it was something that was, when we looked to the size of the agenda that we had to go through to review, it was quite worrying, but it's been a really, really helpful process to go through, involved all parts of the organisation and put us in a good position for the review. And then the core standard self-assessment that we go through each year. Last year was like a watered down version. We didn't have to go through in as much detail as we normally do. We will be this year, and we start that piece of work now, looking at all the areas of partial non-conformity that we had. We've done a lot of work with the academy, between the resilience team and the academy, to take commander training, so some real progress in there. So we will expect to see some progress against the core standards within there. So like normal, that work's taking place now, and it will come through a process of coming to the board, ready for submission in October, November time. So they're the key points. I'm happy to take any other questions I can answer from anybody from now on.
Thank you. Thanks, Nick. Just to explain, it is a requirement of having a clinical non-exec, which Anne is, taken over from Phil in that role, that the clinical non-executive takes responsibility from a non-exec point of view for this agenda. So that's why Anne is now the lead non-exec. It's a big piece of work, and she reminded me, and I've spoken to Rod, it is some time since we took what you might call a board development session, an education session on our requirements under EPRR. And we are in the process of board recruitment. Andrew joined us fairly recently too, and there'll be both executive and non-executive, though the board is changing a little. So sort of expecting to take a board development session sort of later in the year when the full board is, the new board is together, so that we can make sure that all board members are properly briefed and understand our responsibilities under EPRR. It is one of the more serious responsibilities we have as a board, so we'll be doing that later in the year. And thanks for the report, Nick. Are there any questions to Nick on this report? You all okay? No. Thanks, Nick. Good report. Brought us up to date. Lots of assurance. Thank you. And with that, the usual items for information and assurance. But Tim, is there anything you wanted to say around the Quality Committee?
Very briefly, firstly, we're moving to more frequent meetings going forward, so we'll be meeting every 6 weeks. Suzanne's already mentioned the apprenticeship award, so I won't go into that again, but that was noted. We do have issues, and I think Nick alluded to them, in terms of some overarching risks in terms of the volume and logistics around recruitment and people coming off the pipeline, etc. And then the final one, which I'm sure Julian could speak a little bit about, was I think as chair of the committee, I was just getting a little concerned, not specifically about the evidence base or the clinical validity of not administering paracetamol, if somebody has a MI. It was more about we're being held to a standard which we don't really agree with. But yet every committee, we see that we, compared to other ambulance trusts, are down the table on the percentage of patients to whom, and I'm probably getting it all wrong, Julian, in terms of my recounting of it, but nevertheless, it remains an issue that we have to have some clarity on nationally, I think, to say, look, you're not going to be held to that standard if clinically the evidence is that actually there's no point doing it. So that was I suppose that was the thing that is a residual issue yet to be satisfactorily resolved.
Thank you, Tim. Julian, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I put a comment in the Chief Exec's report regarding that IPR exception. So we're undergoing a rapid literature review to demonstrate the lack of evidence for paracetamol in chest as effective analgesia in chest pain. And when we've got that, I'll take it back to NASMED as I did in 2017 and try and lobby again for the removal of that particular analgesic for chest pain. It's the frustration that it simply allows non-registered clinicians who can't administer morphine to administer something that will then sort of tick a box effectively. So it does need to be addressed, and it's something that I've raised repeatedly over the last few years.
Thanks, you, Julian.
Thanks, Julian.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Any questions to Tim? No, thanks for the report, Tim. Can I go to Andrew as chair of Audit Committee? Anything you want to report in today, Andrew?
Thanks, Kath. Just a few things to mention. The transition from Audit 1, who are our old/current internal auditors, to 360 Assurance, which are our new internal auditors. We had assurance about that transition. We had an update on the current 2021 internal audit plan, which hopefully is coming to a conclusion at the end of this month. And so we should be in a position to have head of audit opinion. The audit committee were really, at that last committee meeting, was really positioning itself for the 2021 audits and accounts. So we weren't in a position, though, to approve an external audit plan, but we did give ourselves a chair's action to do that separately. And I'm hoping to have that conversation with Catherine and Ernst & Young in short order. We did also take a look at the draft counter-fraud plan, which I think Steve mentioned. There's a change to the standard, and again, we took a chair's action to look at that separately and approve that at some point. But largely, it was a process of getting us to being able to undertake the audits for 2021.
Thank you, Andrew. Any questions to Andrew? We look forward to seeing the results of that piece of work, Andrew, in due course. Thanks very much. We are ahead of time. I will break for lunch before we recommence this meeting, but as the YAS charity trustees, with some items to take as the corporate trustee for the YAS charity. But in the meantime, just to mop up this morning, I think we've heard a lot this morning of where the trust is coming out of the pandemic and the pressures it still faces. So it was good to see the piece on the violence reduction standard and the body-worn video work as we go forward with that really important piece of work about health and safety of our workforce. Equally, a very comprehensive review from Steve and, of course, from Lizani on our freedom to speak up systems and processes, and they are. I think it was a real indication of the trust that people have in the work that Luzanne is doing, the statistics that we saw, but obviously concerning really what he brought to our attention around online bullying, and I think we will pick that up. I know we will, but important to note at this point that we have a piece of work to do around that. The significant assurance around the work we're doing on serious untoward incidents, and then, as usual, a comprehensive report from Rod and the executive team on the work they've been doing since we last met in public. It's always a great report. It always is one of the highlights of the public board meeting, I always think. So thank you everybody for the work you put into that. And to Catherine for her report on end of year financial position, and indeed the planning going forward for the following year and the complications therein as we move to the new system around the ICSs. And I think that sort of sums up the important work this morning. There were other stuff as well, of course, but a very comprehensive morning and a lot of work got through, so thank you very much. We will come back at, well, it says at 1:15. Would you like to come back a little earlier? But we can do if you like, but you can certainly have a longer lunch break if you'd like to do that too. You want a decent break and we'll come back at 1:15 as scheduled? Yeah, everybody's nodding at me. Okay, okay. Break for lunch, come back at 1:15. We'll go into the items where there's been the corporate trustee for the charity, and then we have a short board meeting in private around contracts to be awarded. So see you in about 3/4 of an hour.
Yeah.